Hi, I'm Gail Scott. Join us here each weekday for Canada AM.
On Wednesday, we'll hear about the added constitutional proposals from Jean Chrétien.
No, but I'm sure it tastes just as good.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. Before I get down to business and a couple of fascinating guests, I want to tell you I've been puzzling and phoning and reading over these so-called major amendments to the constitutional package delivered by Jean Chrétien, the Minister of Justice, last night. And they're major be damned. Some of them are quite odd indeed. Some of the basic facts which are still in the constitutional package is that from where I sit, Ontario and Quebec still have permanent vetoes now and forever, because at the moment they have more than 25% of the population, each one of them, in this country. And if their population drops below 25%, they will, because of their historic position, maintain their permanent vetoes. Now, there was an interesting exchange in the Constitutional Committee last night with Chrétien, by one Tory MP, who said, what happens if some other province reaches 25% of the population down the road? And although it's not in the package, Chrétien said, well, they would get a permanent a veto too. But he did not indicate that if that province, say BC or Alberta, ever dropped below 25%, they would maintain the permanent veto that Ontario and Quebec now have. The other interesting point is that Hatfield is taken, with the Liberal approval, New Brunswick into official bilingualism. Ontario has not been pushed into that. Quebec will be told, if this package passes, that their provincial law and language will not apply in one major effect, in that parents of children in Quebec, whomsoever they may be, would in the future be allowed to choose whether their children go to English or French language schools. At a moment, there is a considerable restriction on the entry of certain youngsters into English language schools in Quebec. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts that this federal provision, which seems fair enough to me on the entrenchment of languages, will annoy Claude Ryan as much as it annoys René Lévesque. The only other thing I want to mention is that they're pushing ahead with their Charter of Rights. And I like it as little now as I did before, because it means, and there's a new phrase in this new 5-page document which was delivered yesterday, that any citizen can seek redress in the courts when they feel their rights have been abrogated. All very well indeed, but it takes away from the politicians the powers to change the laws in accordance with the climate in the country. And bitter and nasty though this might seem, I prefer politicians to change my laws than to be trapped in a constitution where judges change the laws. Because looking south to the United States and knowing ourselves what can happen in this country, it's the simplest matter over a fairly short haul for courts to be packed with like-minded people by governments with power in Ottawa. So the Charter of Rights is, I'm afraid, you know, women's rights, it all looks good, multicultural rights, who needs them? And these other rights, they all look terribly good. But for instance, it could well be, when you come to this business, that Chrétien has also agreed to drop a section that has allowed evidence gathered in an illegal way to be used in court. Sounds great. No evidence illegally obtained may be used in a court of law. That's the American system. The system under which we have operated quite sanely for a number of years is that good evidence, no matter how obtained, is admissible in a court of law. And we're headed down the ridiculous road of the United States whereby you've got a mass killer, a patent scoundrel of the worst order who is able to prove that he was not technically given every last dotted I and crossed T, and he walks away scot-free from any number of crimes and offenses against society at large. Much better to follow our own tradition of the malleable, movable, common sense application of the law. And I'm not advocating police illegal actions in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, there it goes. Who cares? Nobody's standing around in the pubs tonight saying, about the patriation of the Constitution. This is a matter in which I'm greatly concerned. And that's the danger of this whole business. You watch this complex and not very competent questioning in the House of Commons committee, and you think they know less about it than people on the outside know about it. And we know that Trudeau will bring it through his way, pass it with what consequences, and still 7 out of the 8 provinces are challenging the whole procedure in the courts. Anyway, this morning, going to meet one of the more evocative members of the NDP in Victoria, Charles Barber, a man who is quite outspoken in his opinions. And I want to test him on the Van der Zam plan to stuff LRT down the throats of British Columbia. I'm inclined to think that maybe Van der Zam's on the right track. That's Charlie Barber. And then, for the first time ever, I'm going to have a little chat with that man who gets incredible publicity. Buys hockey clubs, buys hockey players, buys this, buys that, owns half the town, knocks down houses to build other ones. The Nelson Skalbania, after the break. Good morning, Mr. Skalbania.
Good morning, Jack.
Nice to have you here. I've seen your face and heard your voice in every piece of media in Vancouver lately.
Oh, right now we need some help. That's why I'm here.
So therefore, you're looking for a plug for something.
Yes.
How many sports organizations do you now own?
Well, I own 51% of the Calgary Flames in the NHL. The Flames, in turn, own 100% of the New Westminster Bruins.
Right,
And 50% of the Calgary Wranglers, which is a junior team equivalent to the Bruins.
right.
And then I own 100% of the Calgary Boomers in the NASL,
Nationals, that's soccer.
North American Soccer League.
North American Soccer League.
Same as the Whitecaps.
The Boomers, yeah.
Yes. And then 50% of the Vancouver Canadians, which is the AAA baseball team here.
Right.
Jimmy Pattison owns the other 50%.
And then you did previously own some WHA teams.
I used to own the Edmonton Oilers and 51% of the Indianapolis Racers.
Is that the one in which there's some class lawsuit for $20 million?
I finally hit the big time, yes. It's still pending.
You closed that down
Yes,
because it was a money loser.
yes.
Then you bought Gretzky.
I bought Gretzky for Indianapolis 3 years ago, I guess, yes.
And you still own him.
No, I sold him too. When I got out of Indianapolis, I was probably sick and tired of hockey, and I got rid of everything I had to do with hockey and sold them all to Peter Pocklington in Edmonton.
At that particular time in Edmonton.
Right.
Now, what is it you're doing now? I occasionally watch this basketball thing and watch all these giants popping up and down and scoring 150 to 149. Is this your latest sports venture?
Well, I'm trying to bring an NBA national basketball team to Vancouver to start this season. There are 23 teams existing in the NBA, and I'd like to get the 24th, the expansion team. The Commissioner O'Brien has stated publicly that he would like to bring the 24th team to Canada to go international before he retires. So I've applied, and we've had 3 qualifications to meet. One is the facility, which we've met. 2 is the ownership, which I think they've approved. 3rd one is, do we have any fans here? So we are under a current 2-week campaign to find out whether, in fact, people in Vancouver want it.
Which facility?
The Coliseum initially.
Is that perfectly good enough?
Totally adequate, very
For
adequate.
16,571 seats?
Well, it'll be more in basketball because they seat in the floors also. So,
So
a
you
little
could-
bit more. It's around 17,000.
You might get 17,000 odd in there.
Yes.
How much did you have to pay for this privilege?
To buy a team?
Oh, to go into the,
Well, the
market for a team.
Well, to buy an NBA team is something in excess of $12 million. For that, you'll get a full complement of players, 23 players, 1 from each of the other clubs. So it's in that order, 13 million.
So you get to, if you get away with it, you'll 12 or 13 million dollars,
Right.
and you'll get 23 American NBA players to come to Vancouver to play at the
they're-
Coliseum. Is that
they're
right?
only American, or if you so choose them. There are very few Canadians that play in the NBA. There are some good Canadian players, but not many that are good enough to play in the NBA.
Well, now, if you're willing to put up the money, why do they insist on you being able to prove that there is a fan quotient in Vancouver for NBA?
Because I may be broke next year. I may not be around next year. So the team should be self-sustaining in the sense that the next owner may have different motives. He may have more business motives. So I think myself, and it's also to convince myself. I myself don't want to write a check every time I go watch a game. I like the team to pay for itself.
So in other words, you've got to produce 8,000 fans who will pay how much?
Well, something less than hockey, about $1.50 a seat less than hockey. So it ranges from $7 to $12.
No, but how much do you have to get down from the fans before you can prove the commissioner of the NBA that there is a potential here?
Well, all I'm asking is a $50 deposit per seat to be sent to Vancouver Basketball, care of the Hotel Georgia.
That's $400,000, am I right?
That's correct.
How many seats have you sold?
I suppose there's about 5,500, that's all.
Well, what's your deadline?
This Friday.
If you don't get the 8,000 by Friday, this is another Skalbania scheme that will go down the tube. Is that right?
Probably, yes.
So it's really quite good. This is why you're such a successful man. If you can get the 8,000 by Friday, 400,000 in deposits, the NBA will then look on you kindly, and on that basis you can go out and borrow most of the 12 million to get into the expansion league.
Probably, yes, or a lot of it.
See, is it that easy to borrow?
For hockey,
$12 million?
in Canada, it's fairly easy to borrow. for basketball in Canada, will be a little more difficult to borrow, probably because basketball is untried, untested in Canada.
But at the moment, you're risking absolutely nothing. You've gone on a PR media campaign, with which I am now assisting you because you're such a fascinating character. And if you can get the 8,000, you're off to the races.
Well, I wish it was only cost me nothing, but the NBA has a fair deposit, which looks now it's non-refundable.
How much?
100,000 US, plus the whatever this is costing, it's costing people. So it's not just pennies.
No.
But it may be the wisest dollars I've spent because of it. If I only got 4,000 or 5,000, maybe I would have lost a lot of money each year for the next year. So maybe this is the wisest dollars I'm spending.
So here we are now. This is what day? Tuesday. Tuesday,
correct.
Tuesday. 5,500 in with the checks.
Yeah.
So you need another 2,500 by Friday. Is that a firm deadline, or will you then tell us on Friday that the NBA has given you another month?
No, the NBA themselves are sending a man up here or two men up here on the 16th to count the tickets. The Friday is the deadline because the NBA has their proposal to send to the expansion committee, because the committee meets the 22nd in Los Angeles to recommend or one way or the other for the All-Star game in February 1st in Cleveland. That's the final decision date, so we've run out of time.
Is the gleam in your eye, if it were to be a success, the fact that it looks like you're going to have a massive covered stadium down in Falls Creek?
Well, of the 23 existing teams, only one plays in a facility more than 17,000, and that's Seattle. And Seattle has been quite successful. In fact, they look at Vancouver as an extension of the Seattle success. I don't know whether it's a requirement or necessity.
In other
they're
words,
too far away.
The Coliseum is perfectly good enough. If you could fill the Coliseum, you'd make a bundle.
It would pay the rent, yes.
You pay the rent and amortize the cost of the thing.
Yes.
Mind you, your track record in holding on to teams ain't all that long, is it?
Well, on the contrary, there's only the two teams previously that I've bought and sold.
Indianapolis Racers and the other one.
The Edmonton Oilers.
And the Edmonton Oilers.
Both in the WHA, which is a tougher.
Will you be telling McKeechie and the boys by Friday or Saturday whether or not it's on or off?
I'll tell them on Saturday, yes.
Saturday?
Yes.
And if it's off, you're down 100,000 plus.
Yes.
And if it's on, you've got to raise 12 or 13 million
well,
dollars.
no, it's half. 50% is cash down. In 30 days, the balance is over 5 years, so only half cash required.
Just $6 million down.
Something of that order.
The rest you can borrow from your friendly banker or your friendly associate.
I don't have friendly bankers.
No friendly
No,
banker?
ask them.
Webster, and a little bit more with Nelson Skalbania after the break. I wouldn't call Nelson Skalbania an extrovert, although he does, many interesting things in public, such as play racquetball with Capozzi. What's your biggest bet?
Dollar-wise in sports, or
Dollar-wise, with Capozzi.
Oh, I guess it was only 10,000, something of the order of $10,000.
$10,000. You played racquetball. Was that to go to the Y?
Yes. If I lost, it went to the Capozzi retirement fund. If I won, it went to the YMCA.
And you won?
Yes.
How badly did you beat the old fellow, the oldest living teenager in British Columbia?
I'll tell you, it was very close. It wasn't decided till the last couple of strokes.
He's remarkably fit, although he does a bit of flab around the middle nowadays, I see.
He's very fit, yes.
It's said that you're going to waken up one morning, Nelson, and suddenly find that you've bought something you've owned, but you won't be upset about it because it was such a good deal. Does that make you giggle, or does it not enhance your image?
Well, I have some of the things I've owned, which in Seattle or Calgary or something, they're all for sale. And the odd agents find out it's for sale, and they call me up and say, "There's a hell of a deal for you. Why don't you buy it?" And the odd time I've told them, well, I do own it already, or I've tied it up already, or whatever, and they don't know I've done that. But that has happened.
Is the basic principle of a successful operator like yourself the fact that everything is always for sale?
Well, historically, I have difficulty paying for non-bankable things like cars or boats or planes or paintings or sports teams by the assets that I have. It all started where I used to have some real estate, say I paid $1 million for, and in a year it's gone up to $1.5 million. So I go to the bank and say, I want to borrow, I've got $500,000 equity. I want to borrow that to buy this painting. And the banker looks at me askance and says, if you think you've got $500,000 in that real estate deal and you want to buy that, which I won't lend you any money on, sell your real estate and buy that. So that's how I started, in a kind of a cycle of buying things and selling it and taking the money and buying things that I really wanted but I couldn't borrow money, say, for.
Is the secret of your success a measure of boldness? For instance, you buy a piece of property and the equity does increase. And all of a sudden you can go to your friendly banker and say, now, the equity's gone up $500,000. You can loan me $250,000 and go out and buy something else.
Well, I wish I could borrow all the time on real estate equity, but it's difficult in real estate equity. That's why I got into the routine of selling the real estate to buy these other things. And, you know, I think I've used that word leverage enough times to explain quickly that if there's any key to whatever success you do is buying something properly for the right terms. In other words, buying an apartment building for $100,000 with $1 down to double your money. It only has to go up to $100,000, $1. To buy an apartment building for $100,000 cash, to double your money, it's got to go up to $200,000. So it's going to go up to $100,000, $1 a lot quicker. So if you do that 1,000 times, you can make it a lot quicker.
When you're talking of doubling money, you're talking of doubling the equity, whether it was $1 or $10,000 or $100,000 in your $1 million investment.
Doubling the money I pull out of my pocket, yes.
Now, a very serious question right now. What is going to happen to real estate? Are we on the verge, are you at the stage now, perhaps I shouldn't ask you this in public, but I will anyway, where real estate prices, commercial and residential, except for imported money with different value, that real estate prices have come to an untrue, unsafe, crashable level?
They are in the Vancouver Lower Mainland area at a kind of a crazy, unprecedented level. For example, there's something ill or sick about the market when you can buy a house for $100,000 in Seattle, the closest adjoining large community. That same house is probably $300 or $350 or more in Vancouver. Lots at Kitsilano or Kerrisdale area, 60-foot lot is $300,000. Well, that's kind of insane.
Is it insane to buy that? I mean, even if you have the money, is it kind of insane? Would a person like yourself have faith in the fact that that $300,000 lot with 5 suites on it will be worth $2.5 million?
I think that it's going to squeeze out to the Fraser Valley, south. I think it's plateaued considerably. At least in my opinion, I think real estate in Vancouver is certainly plateaued, and I think I might either be cautious or move elsewhere. Move in the interior of BC, move to the prairies. It's so high here, it's crazy.
You mean even Calgary can't compare with us in terms of residential house prices?
Oh, Vancouver surpassed Calgary a long way.
What's the answer for the ordinary person, though? I mean, it just makes it impossible for the young person buying a house.
The ordinary person is going to buy a Datsun and move out at Abbotsford or Clearbrook or in that area. There, it's still cheap.
Well, now, in other words, are you telling me that people who are living in houses which they're told by the real estate people would now cost, say, an ordinary house, $250,000? Is that no longer sellable in Vancouver?
Well, it's still saleable because you drive to Vancouver's West End, the for sale signs are up, it seems like 2 days or 3 days, and then you see it sold. So the market is still very strong, but I believe it's either from guys that own existing houses and are just upgrading, and others get a high price for the house they have already, and perhaps foreign buyers or out-of-town buyers. I don't understand how a mailman or a carpenter that can afford those kind of houses and those kind of payments.
The only thing that's keeping up the house prices in Vancouver, therefore, is the rollover value of people who have equity in their properties.
One of them, yes.
That's frightening, though.
Sure it is.
Will it not come to an end?
Well, it has in the past historically, and I'm sure it will here too.
But hasn't it in the past come to an end with a crash?
I don't know.
The Florida land boom, the depression of the 20s, when you could buy anything. When I came to Vancouver in '47, you could buy anything on Angus Drive for between $12,000 and $20,000.
I don't know if it ever crashed that much as remaining at that same plateau level and not going up in value till inflation exceeded it by a lot. I think that's what normally happens in real estate. It's not like the stock market. You want to sell, you sell quickly and sell at a loss. In real estate, you tend not to sell for a loss.
One more short segment with Nelson Skalbania. Fascinating man. 42, East End kid. By profession what?
Consulting engineer.
After the break. Maclean's magazine described you as a fully qualified jet setter the other day. You're not really, are you?
Whatever that means.
We flew off to Greece to get married.
Commercially, yes. So
Well,
there's a lot of people.
I thought you took your own jet with you.
No, not at all.
What happened to your jet? You and Jimmy Hart were flying about in the jet a couple of years ago.
I sold my jet this February, or this last February, and I have a more modest plane now.
But a man is worth $600 million. Surely it's a matter of no consequence whether or not you have a...
Where did you get that figure? There's a difference between selling something worth 600 million, and there's a difference between the net figure.
Far be it from me to be brash enough or gauche enough to ask you for what you're worth, but what you have done is you've created a financial empire in how many years?
A lot of years. 10, 12.
10,
15.
12 years. Starting off as an earthquake engineer.
Yes.
Whatever that may be. What is it?
I'm keeping the buildings up in the West End from falling over in either a wind or an earthquake.
You study that. That's what
Yes.
your degree is,
Yes.
in earthquake engineering. And then I must say that I sat aghast when I watched the bulldozers knocking down that beautiful old house in Marine Drive. Was that not kind of gauche?
Obviously, you've never been in the house.
No, I hadn't. No,
Then why would you call it beautiful?
Well, it looked like a big, substantial house in a beautiful part of town. Was it just an old,
It looked
an old
great.
shack?
It looked great from a distance, but inside it was not livable.
What are you going to build there instead?
A newer house, more modest house, I hope.
Did I say Greek villa?
No, you daren't.
Because I understand you took offense at
I'm-
somebody calling it a Greek villa.
I married a Greek woman, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a Greek villa.
Okay, now back to the serious stuff again. Interest rates. Now, what are they at today? 17, 18, 20% if you want to...
Prime plus 2 is about 20%, yes.
20%.
If you want to borrow money, yes.
Can a young man going into business today possibly predicate his operation on 20% interest?
Well, I don't know how to make 20% pay in real estate right now. It's tough, and that's why I've been treading water and going sideways in real estate and maybe not doing as much, waiting to either A, the rates come down, or B, anything that I buy, I hope that the guy I buy from carries me at a second mortgage or a third mortgage at rates lower than 20.
And of course, like in Hawaii, people are so desperate to get rid of some of the fancy price property that a lot of people are offering to carry the second or third mortgage at a reasonable rate.
In fact, that's the only thing that seems to be selling right now is when the vendor carries.
And you would advise anybody who was in trying to buy a piece of property to try and get the vendor to carry it at less than the going commercial mortgage rates.
Correct. And if he doesn't, you'll find somebody that will.
It's just as secure that way as borrowing through the recognized institutions.
Oh, sure it is, sure.
Yeah. Okay, now you said that you're leveling off at the moment. So Skalbania is pulling back from the high-price stuff in Vancouver and concentrating where? Seattle?
Well, real estate is kind of a portable business. If you're not doing any deals here or you can't find anything good here, you can pick up and go to Seattle, go anywhere else, go to Denver, and all you really need in the business is a telephone booth. And right now, real estate probably in Denver is not bad. Seattle's not bad. Alberta's not bad. Interior BC isn't that bad right now.
California isn't that bad either, is it?
Well, California's, some of it's a little high-priced also, but
What does all this spotlight do to your private life? As I said at the beginning, you are not really a natural extrovert. Or am I misjudging your personality, Nelson?
can't you tell how voracious I am?
Do you object to this? I mean, now you need some help. You want to sell some more tickets for your basketball team. And while you're probably quite like old Webster and don't mind appearing on the program, you just as soon not.
Well, if there's a bad thing about it is that some things happen to me in life and personal and elsewhere that normally nobody would give a damn about.
Right.
Now it seems that whenever I don't wear a pair of shorts, they know about whether I don't wear a pair of shorts. And maybe it isn't, maybe I'm losing some of that anonymity.
Yeah, and of course it's a price you pay for being an entrepreneur who certainly isn't harmed by the publicity he gets.
Well, I'm not sure about the word entrepreneur. I just happen to be in
Industrialist, investment.
I just
whatever
happen to be
businessman.
Well, whatever. In some businesses that are in the public, I guess.
Yeah, the word entrepreneur you feel has a little bit of a thing to it which you'd rather not be described as.
Well, a hard-working businessman maybe, or hard-working engineer maybe.
Oh, there's not much doubt about that. Now, one last plug for your basketball. Where do people send the $50? And if you get the additional $2,500, I don't require any commission, mortgage back, or anything else. But presumably there is an audience in Vancouver for the National Basketball Association.
Well, it'll be the Canadian NBA team, the only one in Canada. But it's $50 to send you $50 a seat. Send it to Vancouver basketball, care of the Georgia, and you get your 50 back, and it's cashed only if we get the NBA.
You cashed only, and of course the name will depend on which brewery sponsors the team. Is that correct?
Correct.
See, I know something about business.
Thank you.
And it's not a villa. And you don't want people to be too proby. And when are you playing Kaposi again?
Before he dies, and I hope shortly.
You hope to play him shortly.
Yes.
You don't know if he dies shortly. I just wanted to get that clear. Now, is it true about the $200,000 to Y to build a racquetball court, providing you had a reservation every day?
Unfortunately, yes. I figured I'd rather spend my time earning some dollars to give them the money rather than waste my time finding out which court is empty and when it's empty and this kind of stuff.
Is the Y keeping the bargain?
Yes, they are.
My thanks to Nelson Skalbania. Best of luck, Nelson. Best of luck. What patronizing arrogance to say the best of luck to Nelson Skalbania. We'll learn from Makichi and Bernie and Ron whether or not you pulled it off and whether or not you got to raise the $6 million in cash.
In cash.
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 Real cash.
Real cash.
Something you got to sell to raise that $6 million.
I can't use mirrors, no.
You can't use mirrors.
No.
The other 6 is easy. Next, the old clothes and porridge with a socialist after the break. I have in my hand another copy delivered to my home yesterday of the debates of the Legislative Assembly on Hansard, sent to me by a kindly Premier, Bill Bennett, to make sure that I know about the debate concerned with BC's place in Confederation. Charles Barber, NDP, Victoria, were you happy and pleased to get this copy of Hansard from the Premier of BC so that you know what's going on in the province?
Yes, I was, and that's because I'm sympathetic to him. And I guess it's because you're not, that you're not so happy.
You're sympathetic to him?
Yes, I am. Let me tell you why.
In what way are you sympathetic to Mr. W.R. Bennett, the Premier of the province of British Columbia?
I recognize his problems. He's down 10 or 12 points in the polls. The coalition is coming apart at the seams. He's discovered it's easier to win an election as a coalition than it is to govern as a coalition. Jack Kempf, Jack Davis, and now Rafe Mayer are actively unhappy with his own leadership. It's perfectly clear that Grace McCarthy's mishandling of the Vancouver Convention Centre is blowing up in their faces, as is the proposal for BC Place and all the other big-ticket items going nowhere. Mr. Van der Zem's in trouble with the GVRD. Hugh Curtis's Financial Administration Act is totally unpopular. The Planning Act is going to have to be withdrawn. And by and large, people across the province have now recognized that if his name were Bill Smith, he wouldn't be Premier of anything. All in all, you got to have sympathy for the guy. So why begrudge him a few of your tax dollars to try and get himself bailed out?
Never have I
Jack.
seen so many crocodile tears delivered so quickly by a politician in the history of British Columbia. But the guy has 3 years to go, 2 and 3 years to go.
Right.
And you well know, probably you're sitting smugly on your hands along with your leader, quite confident you have to do nothing but walk in with the Social Democratic Party at the next election. Is that correct?
There's a danger in being too smug. We've made that mistake several times before. But as well, though, there's something to be said for the strategy of giving him rope. The New Democratic Party was accused of blunder upon blunder when we were in office.
I can name you some of them.
Sure, and some of them were fair accusations. I think you could probably name a lot more now about the current government. And it's an amazing thing. The government that got elected on a business ticket, the government that claimed it could do things more efficiently and readily and ably than any other government ever could before, now turns out to be one of the least competent managerially and administratively and politically of all the administrations we've had in this province.
Now you will throw at me the fact that you were largely responsible, or in a large way responsible, for making Fraser and Bennett eat crow on the Princess Marguerite, which was on again, off again, off again, off again, is now on again.
That's right. Once again, it was, though, for our purpose of things, simply a matter of giving him rope. Hugh Curtis and Alex Fraser and Don Phillips told us that the vessel was unsafe for babies and tourists. It was unfit for anyone. Unfortunately, Lloyd's of London told them something quite different, as did the Canadian Coast Guard, as did the American Coast Guard, as did now the very most recent report. We simply made it our business, I in particular, being the member for Victoria, to stand up in the legislature day after boring day and read out, I can even remember it now, the penultimate paragraph on page 4 of the Edwardson and Company report, Electrical and Structural Engineers, Marine Design in Montreal. Nothing in this report shall be construed as to suggest that the vessel is unfit to continue in her present service, end quote. It's a simple matter of reading to the Socreds their own reports and asking them how could they be so foolish as to scrap a perfectly good vessel like the Marguerite.
Have you yet found out, because I haven't, because I've tried to get Fraser on the program a number of times, and he's very busy these days, I suppose. Why did they make that stupid mistake of taking the daytime ferry and making it into a nighttime ferry, and taking the other one, making a nighttime ferry into a daytime ferry, and putting the Marguerite up virtually on the stocks? Yeah. What was it? Was that sheer bad management by the ferry corporation, or was that a political decision?
I think...
Oh, there was a separate company for the Marguerite.
Yes, that's right, BC Steamships. I think the government, in fact, got bad advice, and it got contradictory advice. I think as well the government didn't have the common sense to be able to determine which of those several sets of advice was the best. They certainly didn't listen to the tourist industry on Vancouver Island, which told them very plainly and straightforwardly, you get rid of the Marguerite, you're losing millions. You replace it with the Queen of Prince Rupert, and you replace it with the Jetfoil, you're going to lose more millions on those services, as well as the millions to be forfeited in tourist revenues. They didn't listen to anyone, except finally Hugh Curtis. Mr. Curtis was the chairman of the Cabinet Committee that was assigned by Mr. Bennett to reconcile the fight between Mr. Fraser and Mr. Phillips over the allocation of the Queen of Surrey, which is another vessel in the whole mess that the government fooled around with. Credit where it's due. Finally, after a year and after losing millions, they made the right decision, and that's a good thing, and we're glad the Marguerite's back. But if ever there were an illustration of incompetence on the part of social credit, it is surely this whole fiasco with the Princess Marguerite, the Prince Rupert, the Jetfoil, and the Surrey. Well, the four of them together and the forfeited tourist revenues cost the Crown $20 million last year.
I would agree with you on that, but there are some things in which I don't agree with you. I, for instance, not perhaps fully in the picture, was delighted to see the autocratic Van der Zam finally coming out and saying, hey, we're going to do this and thus, and if you don't like it, we'll change it. Because transit of the Lower Mainland has been a convoluted, complicated disaster in the hands of petty bureaucratic politicians for 25, 30 years to my own knowledge. Somebody must do something. Surely Van der Zam is right.
He's right to make a decision and to make it stick. Our concern is whether or not this particular decision is the right one. Let me illustrate.
No, don't illustrate. How much time have we got for a break? Oh, lots of time. Illustrate.
Enough time? Let me illustrate then. The only other community on the west coast of North America that's had comparable transit problems in a roughly similar geographical area is San Francisco. San Francisco has something called Bay Area Rapid Transit. Everyone calls it BART. That's the friendly nickname, and Westinghouse made them a promise. Westinghouse said, you give us this money, and we will give you the following design for an automated light rapid transit system in San Francisco. It'll run on time, it'll run without trainmen, it'll save you a lot of money, it'll avoid the cost of freeways, the social dislocation of more highways through more neighborhoods. We'll do all this for you. Yours truly, Westinghouse. It's been a bust, it's been a bomb, it's been a flop. It runs now only 80% of the time. The downtime for the whole system is 20% in BART. It meets the original speed design objectives no more than 70% of the time. They've had to reduce the speed because they can't keep the trains together in the tunnel. And do you know what the carrying capacity is today for BART against the promised objectives? 40%. 40% of the original passenger capacity they thought BART would meet by 1981 is all they've met.
Do you mean the passenger traffic carried or the carrying capacity?
According to Westinghouse and BART's own projections, by 1980, I don't know what the 81 figures are, currently they have only hit 40% of what was originally promised a decade ago.
To carry or attracting passengers? Actually carry.
40% of what they said they would carry is all they carried. Now, what have we got in Mr. Van der Zam's proposal? It is basically the same technology. It is automated, it is computer-driven, it is computer-guided. The basic technology, that notion of almost levitation, that magnetic propulsion, is different to be sure. But the concern that I have, the legitimate technological questions that have got to be answered are these. Is it in fact as safe as he argues? If so, show us the record, demonstrate how it is. When you don't have a trainman aboard, what happens in an emergency, especially when that particular system is 10 or 20 feet above the ground, it's an elevated system? Say power stops. We have a hydro outage across the province in Greater Vancouver, wherever. Power stops, the train's up in the middle of nowhere, there's no trainman aboard. How do people get off if they have to get off? What if there's a small fire aboard? I was asking you before we came on the show. You said they press a button. Great. So now they're 10 or 20 feet above the ground. What do they do then? How do they get off? One of the questions that has to be answered by Mr. Van der Zalm is that issue of public safety. And if there are answers, good. Let's hear them. It's our duty to ask them, though, because people are going to be asking them before they walk aboard. Secondly, what demonstration can be made that the same problems that Westinghouse and BART ran into in San Francisco, the same basic design for automated transit, will not be encountered here?
10 years later.
10 years later, they still can't make BART work. It still doesn't work, and now they're talking about bringing in a totally new control system for all of BART, scrapping the old one altogether.
I think your fears about safety are just alarmist, that's all. Obviously, if you're on a train that stops, if you're in a London subway that stops, you sit there until they get it going again.
Yes,
you don't go out in the long, lonely tunnels.
Well, if you do so when you're guided by trainmen, and they have rules for that too.
Obviously, the elevated route is the way to go because it's so much cheaper. It's not an eyesore. It's silent. It prevents all the real estate dislocation and prevents a lot of real estate rip-off, too, by operators. It's an all-Canadian system. The Ontario government has guaranteed it. And there was a time when we couldn't get to the moon. We would miss the moon, or the Americans would miss the moon. Now they can land on any part of the moon.
That's right.
I think you lack faith, and I think perhaps your lifetime in Victoria has put you back into a somewhat Victorian attitude towards progress, Mr. Barber.
Let me argue with a bit. The Americans landed on the moon and did so brilliantly, but look what happened when they tried to send a few helicopters to Iran. Technology is not always
That's merely
reliable.
because of the downgrading of technical instruction in a rather dicey armed services. I'd hate to see the Canadian Army attempt the same kind of thing because they'd probably do no better.
I would wish them the fortune that they never had to.
I think that was a snide remark about Iran. They fouled up a rescue operation.
Yeah, but it's a powerful illustration of how technology does not always serve us, and things are not always what they seem. And in this particular case, an operation that was rehearsed for 6 months fell apart. What I want to argue is that Mr. Van der Zalm owes it to the people of Vancouver and the taxpayers of British Columbia, who are going to foot the whole bill, that this technology has a reasonable chance of working, that the interests of public safety are served, that it's affordable, and that it's a better design than any other system we could get.
It's like talking about the Constitution. Who understands the detail of the Constitution? What kind of assurances do we want? We want an assurance from Van der Zalm, yes, it works. Yes, the Ontario government construction firm says, yes, it works. Yes, we've got it on a trial track. Wouldn't you rather go with a Canadian developed industry, spending the money in our country on modern technology, even if there are a few wrinkles, than buy something from Germany or Europe?
If the Canadian system works and it's just as affordable, you bet.
There's no reason why it shouldn't work.
I hope it does, but we want to see answers to those questions and to a lot of others that people in the engineering fields have been sending to us, and I presume to you and others as well in BC, about the ALRT system, and have it demonstrated that we're not buying pigs in pokes and 10 years down the road coming to regret it. There's one other argument.
The only safe thing really that you can count on, which is not a pig in a pot, is a horse and cart. It needs only hay. It goes steadily. Nobody ever gets injured. If it breaks down or breaks a leg, you can get off. Really, Charles? You're not willing to go on Canadian technology, automated all the way?
I'm not willing to commit $1 billion blind to the development of a new system that's yet to be proven in a significant way. We're talking finally in Vancouver, Jack, when the whole system is built, when it goes out to Mission, when it goes out to Chilliwack, when we have it working as it should and must work because we can't afford the private automobile anymore, we're talking about $1 billion worth of public investment.
Good God. These automated monorails have been working on ski lifts, expositions, certain cities in the US, not in Britain, for a number of years. I think you're just being politically difficult. I can object to you, I can understand you objecting to Van der Zalm's arrogance, but I've got no faith in the GVRD transportation people of the UTA, do you?
I got the faith that they finally have to run the system because they're local, they're in charge, and they know better than us in Victoria how to run it.
Weakness, like Gracie's weakness in PBC. If it's all that damn good, why don't they run it themselves and build it themselves?
It
right?
makes you ask the question.
Webster and Charlie Barber, isn't it?
That's the name.
The man from Victoria. He came over by horse and cart and rowboat after the break.
Going back by balloon.
Just want to make the one final point with Charles Barber about Van der Zalm, who certainly has a big mouth, and UTA. 25 years. I've been watching reports pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up. Nobody does anything in this province in rapid transit. Now, their formula may be bad. May well be. It's going to throw an incredible load on the local taxpayer. It'll probably finish up in property taxes, agreed?
Everything else does.
Whereas you would do it out of general revenue and take it out of our provincial taxes.
And the gas tax.
Just as heavily. But the money would come from us.
That's right.
Just as heavily as
Yes.
it would come from social credit. But at least the man is saying he's going to do something.
Again, let me express the caution. I'm delighted that people make decisions. My concern is that they make the right decisions, and that's a corny old thing to say. But when you're talking about the stakes,
Agreed.
$1 billion worth, you want to make darn sure that you're not finally a decade from now going to turn around and discover you went with the wrong technology because you were in a hurry to make any decision. There's another reason why he's in a hurry. Let me offer it if I may. Mr. Van der Zam is in some trouble in his own riding. He didn't win by all that much in May of '79. Every poll in Greater Vancouver tells us that at the moment social credit's fortunes are pretty low, and that includes Surrey as well.
These are your NDP polls.
Sure. Well, the same polls I'm sure you guys see as
Yes,
well. We
yes.
all end up looking at the same polls over one another's shoulders. Mr. Van der Zam, who's an ambitious and able politician, clearly wants to be premier at some time or another and can't afford to lose his own riding. He's decided, I guess, that it's worthwhile to get something done quick, to bully the GVRD, to alienate his own social credit friends in local government throughout Vancouver, to appear like a bully to the people, in order to be able to take personal credit at the next provincial election for being the first transit minister to bring transit from Vancouver to Surrey, which happens to be his own riding. I suppose that's one of the reasons why he's so desperate to make a decision, any decision, no matter how good or bad, in a quick time.
Will you not also tell me that he's about to wipe out planning authority in all regional districts under his own planning act, which will become a socialist-type czar in Victoria?
If a socialist government ever tried to impose Mr. Van der Zam's planning act, there would be red flags flying across BC. People would be up in arms and they'd be demonstrating on the front steps of the legislature.
Is that an act or a white paper?
It's a white paper so far. It would be an act if Mr. Van der Zam has his way, but thank goodness he won't. Let me tell you why. This planning act will take us back to the days of Governor Douglas and the Colonial Office, where all the decisions were made in Victoria.
Is it that bad?
It is. Let me offer another
Back to the
illustration.
days of Governor Douglas.
And the Colonial Office in Victoria, you bet. Mr. Van der Zam, who is, to say the least, a centralizer, that may be part of kind of the European political tradition that he honors and comes from, and fair enough. Mr. Van der Zam is a centralizer. He got rid of resource boards, which were an attempt, no matter how flawed, to decentralize planning authority from Victoria.
They were dreadful.
Tell them they
Vancouver
were...
Resource Board, Kitsilano Resource Board.
And resource
One of
boards
your
around the
biggest
province.
mistakes.
You think so?
Yes.
I got to argue with you. You may talk about the execution, and fair enough. We made a lot of mistakes. But I will not yield on the principle that local people are better able than deputy ministers sitting behind big desks in Victoria to make decisions about the allocation of social and health services in their local communities. And that decentralist principle is what the resource boards were all about. Now give us heck, if you wish, for bungling the execution. Fair enough. We did it too fast. We did it with too little preparation. Fair enough. But I, again, argue that the principle of decentralized decision-making in human resources is just as valid and just as necessary as it is in local government. But Mr. Van der Zam doesn't believe that. He has returned to Victoria all authority in human resource planning, and he did that when he was minister, and now he wants to do that in planning. And let me offer just one practical illustration of how it works. Right now, in every municipality across BC, including Vancouver, there is an office or a function called the approving officer. And it is his job to act as liaison, as go-between, as interlocutor between private developers, public developers, and the local interest.
Fair enough.
These are employees of the municipality or the city. They are loyal to the city, they follow the direction of the city, they respond to local municipal initiative. What's Mr. Van der Zam proposing to do? Take every one of them out of municipal employ and make them provincial employees. And what's worse, he's going to make them order in council employees. They will not be employees under the Public Service Act. They will be political appointees of the cabinet, serving at the pleasure of the government of the day.
That's bad.
It's stupid, and it reveals his hand.
Bad.
It reveals his hand because what that hand tells you is Mr. Van der Zam does not trust that key civil servant interface system called approving officer to act any longer in the loyal interests of a municipality. Instead, they're going to act according to the provincial interest as Mr. Van der Zam sees it. That is a step backwards by any standard. And let me offer one more argument. If the NDP tried to pull such a stunt, such a heavily centralist, provincially controlling system of land use in this province, you, Jack, and 10,000 developers around this province would be screaming bloody murder.
Agreed.
But when Mr. Van der Zalm
I
does
was
it,
not aware of this fact that they were going to take the approving officers in the municipalities. Vancouver is accepted, I think.
the Vancouver Charter will be amended. You bet. I'll bet you any money the Vancouver Charter would be amended to bring it totally into line with the Planning Act.
They make the
And
approving officer order in council. This is in the white paper.
it's right there.
You've read that?
Yeah, yeah.
That's for sure.
I'm sorry I didn't bring my copy.
On the other hand, however, you and the NDP willingly voted for another piece of arrogant centralist legislation which was passed, was it last year? British Columbia's Utilities Commission, which puts entirely in the hands of the Cabinet the direction of industry, energy and everything in this province. Nobody can lift a finger without the approval of the Cabinet with its political considerations. Am I correct?
Jack Kempf correctly pointed out that by and large the new Utilities Act derives almost entirely from our original act of a similar name. It's a strange thing. If we were to do such a thing now, it's part of the double standard in this province, eh? When the NDP does something tough and centralist, and you bet our energy policy was pretty centralist. Sure it was. The British Columbia Petroleum Corporation was a centralist instrument to try and gather under one roof money that otherwise would be unavailable and return it to the public purse. We think it was a good move. Maybe we were wrong. It was nonetheless centralist. When Social Credit does something even more centralist, somehow the double standard is now invoked and they can get away with it and we never could.
Well,
It's a
maybe
bit
that's why
unfair.
all the businessmen are having quiet little chatty poos with Davy Barrett nowadays.
They're doing that.
Maybe they're very much afraid of, because Bennett is not really a free enterprise so much as a survivor. Is that not correct?
I don't know if he's even going to prove to be a survivor.
Anything can happen. It may well be that this province is still so polarized that the next election will be fought not on issues but on hysteria by both sides.
At the moment, I think the only arrow in Mr. Bennett's
quiver
is us. Is us. By which I mean, the only thing Mr. Bennett has going for him right now is the fear that some people still have about the return of a new Democrat administration.
Now hold your breath. Difficult though it may be. We're going to take some phone calls to Charles. If you can get a one-day next week, she'll do better than I'm doing after the break. Heavy discussion with Charles Barber. There are good things in the white paper for planning.
Yes, there
A couple
are.
of good things. Mention them.
You bet. The notion of high-rise zoning, the notion that one building can be zoned in several separate ways to allow for several separate functions is a good thing, and I congratulate Mr. Van der Zalm for that. The notion of intensive agriculture, feedlots and so on, being recognized in a planning act and being allowed thereby as municipalities as one of the agricultural options is a good thing. A third thing, perhaps the most important, but Alec Fraser and Bob McClelland are totally opposed, the requirement in law that corporations like Hydro, ministries like Highways be required to disclose their own plans, their own view of the public interest in advance of its execution is also a good thing.
Good.
We support those aspects of the proposed Planning Act. Indeed, most people in the local government do too.
Okay, just a couple of bits of gossip, then I'm going to go to the phones. You made a crack about Davis.
Mr. Kempf?
Davis would never vote against social credit, would he?
I think he has the courage to do it. If it were a matter of principle, I think he'd do that.
Kempf, former caucus chairman.
Yes.
On the outs, of course, but still, they're not going to vote with you to bring down the government.
I want to give them the credit that they mean what they say and that they're honest about it. And both Mr. Davis and Mr. Kempf have indicated that they will vote according to their conscience and their principles. And I want to give them the credit that if an issue comes up which is not consistent with conscience and principle, regardless of what it would do to the government, they would vote what their conscience told them to do. And you know, that hasn't come up yet, and so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and wait and see, okay?
And then there's the sudden, dramatic disappearance into the void of nothingness of Rafe Mayer.
Yeah, that's the worst news. Mr. Bennett.
What do you mean the worst news?
Well, because Mr. Davis and Mr. Kempf, with all respect to them, don't have the political acumen or stature that Mr. Mayer does. And the loss of Mr. Mayer from the ranks of the coalition is the worst news so far that Mr. Bennett's had in 1981, but
Oh,
the year's
of course,
young.
he's a coalition one too. He was not an original social creditor, was
By
he?
no means. He was a liberal, he became a Tory, and now he's a Socrat. That's almost as good as Hugh Curtis, who was a liberal, became a Tory, joined Action Canada, and then became a Socrat.
How many have we got altogether? We've got Williams, Gardner,
McGear,
Mayer, McGear,
Hewitt,
Davis, Hewitt. What was
Heinrich. Mr. Hewitt was a liberal.
Heinrich?
Mr. Heinrich. Those are the ones who come to mind. Card-carrying liberals. Respect them for their former opinions, but you wonder about their current. Well, what the heck.
Anyway.
A coalition is a useful instrument for getting elected. It works.
Was Mayor a good
It's
minister?
hard to govern as a coalition.
From your point of view, was Mayor a good minister? Did he answer questions?
Yeah, he was pretty forthcoming, he was tough, he was combative, he was candid, he was blunt, he was respected.
But you don't expect him to blow apart. You know perfectly well that the reins of power do astonishing things to keep disparate people in the same cattle pen.
It's a hard and getting to be a harder thing for Mr. Bennett, though, to make sure that continues. Let me
Whereas
repeat.
the NDP caucus is all sweetness and light. Everybody loves everybody all the time.
Oh, I wish.
And you're all perfect.
There's one difference. There's one difference.
Go on.
Can I have the minute?
Yes. Go
Okay. When we're in trouble, and you bet we get into trouble, at least we have to rely upon, as New Democrats, something of a tradition and a philosophy and a point of view. And when we get in trouble, we've got that to fall back upon. And that counts for something in the political storms, and it really does. The Tories, by the way, nationally, have much of that to fall back upon, too.
Yeah, and,
when they get in trouble, okay. When the Socrates get in
now
trouble...
that Broadbent's in Trudeau's hip pocket, that doesn't really matter at all, does it? The fact that Broadbent and Blakeney are at each other's throats doesn't really matter at all, because we have your nice little enclave in here. And the fact that Barrett, of course, I'm sure, also is in the Broadbent-type pocket and would love to nationalise all the oil companies in the country, whereas some of you wouldn't.
Well, you know, if you took a poll, and Gallup's been doing so lately, and asked the Canadian people whether or not they thought that it was preferable to bring the energy industry under public ownership or leave it in the hands of foreign ownership, you know which they'd go for? Public ownership.
They might be wrong,
Public
though,
ownership.
but they might be wrong.
It's possible.
It might turn out the lights in this country because of the dominance, of the domineering ownership of foreign interests.
And for those of us
There
who...
isn't any doubt that the Liberal policy has cost a lot of jobs in Alberta, like it or lump it.
It has so far. You know, capital can go on strike too, eh? It's not just labor that goes on strike.
No.
Capital goes on strike, and sometimes they do it to make a political point.
You had Skalbania. If you want to buy a decent house, buy it in Seattle. You can get for $100,000 what will cost $300,000 up here. And people with that kind of money have no nationalistic sentiments about what they're going to do.
No, they'll go where they can make a fast buck, and in the case of Mr. Skalbania, an honest buck. He's an honest businessman.
And that goes for the working man as well as everybody else.
Sure it does.
Because there aren't really, the working man is now really a moderate capitalist in many ways.
Well, he'd like to be, I'm sure.
I mean, your generation with the two-income families.
Yep.
You're changing the whole social structure of the nation. And I don't like it.
Hey.
I'd rather see people suffer.
Hey, come on, I got a nice generation. I come from a nice generation, Jack. You be nice to us.
Rogers, what was he? Is he an original social candidate?
Mr. Rogers? No, I think he was a liberal also, was he not? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Had to be. How about some telephone calls?
Sure.
I'm having a morning off, ladies and gentlemen. This is great. Go ahead, speak into camera number 2. So they'll get the full flare of your
see a
blue
brick
eyes.
wall in that thing.
No, camera number 2.
I see.
Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. I would like to know why, if we're not going to invest in Canadian transit systems, how the hell we can expect other people to invest in it.
Well, good point. And as long as we can demonstrate that the Canadian technology works, and it's safe and reliable and it's affordable, then we deserve to be able to sell it. And if we can't demonstrate those things, then we don't deserve to sell it to anyone
Just
at all.
a moment. Are you telling me, though, that because of your own fear of the 20th century, that you would not ride in an ALRT vehicle which had no driver?
I'd ride in it, and I'd want to know how safe it was, and I'd want to know if it was safer maybe than one with a driver. But I have the obligation to ask those questions in a tough, unyielding, relentless way, and let me offer another example of how it worked. We asked those questions about the government's phony baloney claim concerning the Princess Marguerite, and finally we exploded it, and they had to back down and admit they were fibbing. It turned out to be perfectly safe after all. For a year, Jack, we pressed and pressed and pressed in that legislature, and we won the point. What we're doing now, what I'm trying to do this morning, is press the point again. Show us, tell us, prove us. Not to use an American analogy too literally, but I'm from Missouri. I'm skeptical about this stuff. I'm always skeptical of claims of wonderful new technology,
The man in the
regardless
street
of
hasn't
origin.
got a clue. One side says one thing, one side says the other thing. You know
This
that
side
perfectly
says,
well.
show me,
it's
prove
like,
it.
It's like a murder trial. You can get psychiatrists to say anything you want for the crown or for the defense. You know, somebody's got to make a decision. Obviously, they're not going to make a decision on an unsafe operation.
Of course not. No one wants an
Backed by the Ontario government, guaranteed by the Ontario Crown Corporation.
And BART is perfectly safe too, but it doesn't work. It's flopped. It's a failure. And we heard the same promises there that we're hearing now. And so I'm just saying, let's take one of those famous second looks and let's make darn sure that we're putting our money in the right place.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Barber,
Good morning.
I would point out to you, sir, that monorails has been a reality and a success in West Germany, who has so-called socio-democratic government. Furthermore, your attacks on both Mr. Van der Zam and Mr.
Bennett.
seem rather well rehearsed and well-versed and orchestrated. I marvel at this oddity because word for word, your language vis-a-vis Mr. Van der Zam and Bennett this morning is almost word for word what was printed by a well-known NDP columnist in this morning's paper.
Who's the well-known NDP columnist?
Alan Garr.
Alan Garr.
I marvel at this gathering of thoughts or conspiracy of thoughts.
Sir, 2 replies.
Part of the NDP.
Sir, 2 replies. First of all, I give you my word, I have not read the paper this morning. I have not read it. Secondly, the ALRT system is not a monorail system. It's not monorail at all. It's light rapid transit. It works on 2 rails, and it operates on the principle of propulsive magnetism. It's not a monorail system.
Linear induction. Now
That's
you're
right.
splitting hairs. It looks like a monorail.
Well, it's up in the air.
With 2
But
rails.
Yeah, but it's not suspended below a monorail. It doesn't ride on top of one monorail. It's not a monorail.
Regardless.
Anyway,
Now, Mr. Van der Zam was pushing monorails last year.
is
That's true.
Mr. Garr one of your favorite columnists? Do you regard Mr. Garr as an NDP supporter?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't.
No. Fair enough. Thank you for your call, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, me.
Oh, no. Don't go ahead. You're the first call after the break.
Okay,
with
thank
the,
you.
the loquacious and informative and bright Charles Barber after the break. You didn't throw in from your friend Gar's column that Bob Bonner's daughter's working for Gracie. Eh?
Well, maybe she's more able than the last 8 executive assistants have been, or whatever it is.
Sweeney's still there.
Is he still there?
Yeah.
Oh. I hope he lasts.
I mean, you can't blame them for that kind of thing because you hired some prize executive assistants when you were in government. I'll tell you.
No doubt.
They were more fun than a carload of monkeys.
It's a tough job.
And I mean monkeys. Is that a racist remark?
Not for the monkeys.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm retired, a long-time social creditor, and I've been very disillusioned. Now, you made a little remark about the businessmen having little chit-chats with Barrett.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were having chit-chats with Barber there, they'd be doing a lot better. And I would like to see Barber throw his hat into the ring as the
leader of the NDP.
Opposition, and I'm sure that there'd be an awful lot of social credits, myself included, would be switching over to NDP.
You see, Victoria NDPers are different from other NDPers. They're a little bit more suave, more sophisticated, more in tune with tourism.
And more often living in the 19th century.
Oh, the question, apart from playing the piano, of which you are an expert, do you still play it?
I do, and the violin also.
Do you play it for money?
I have, as a matter of fact. I had my first commercial engagement at a Victoria hotel a summer ago, and it was lots of fun. I had to use a stage name, though. They were worried about losing business.
Did you join the union?
I did not. It's not a union hotel, I must confess.
Charles Barber worked in a non-union hotel.
I confess it.
On a non-union gig.
You're right.
Is it gig or jig? Gig. Non-union gig.
I was accompanying a violinist friend. And it
Without
was
a
great
musician's
fun.
union card.
Not even that. What a shame.
That's appalling.
Now I'm in trouble. I never should have mentioned it.
How old are you, Charles?
I'm 31.
Oh, you've lots of time when Barrett retires to go for leadership. Okay, and thank you very much. And Charles, thank you, and I thanks you. And here's Kamloops. Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
That's you.
To Mr. Barber.
Good morning.
I made a remark that a lot of people are beginning to think that the only reason the Premier is because his name is Bennett. This is a belief that I've held ever since he first took office. He made a public remark at one time that he wanted the people of BC to suffer for ever having elected an NDP government. Now, a person that would make a statement like that should be in no position to control anything, that anybody who wants people to suffer. Now, I didn't like his father as a premier. He was too arrogant. But W.A.C. Bennett must be turning over in his grave at the antics of his son. I think that the best thing that Bill Bennett could do for Canada, he professes to be a Canadian, but I don't believe that he is a Canadian even if he was born in Canada. The best thing he could possibly do for Canada would be to commit suicide.
Oh, now don't be quite as rough as that, please. That's not necessary. You could have said to quit politics or something.
Let me a word in Mr. Bennett's defense, okay? We give him a bad time all the time.
Yeah, and before you give it, when the old man ran the government in the early stage, it really was a small business.
Of course.
Capable of being run by one man, a budget of about $80 or $90 million in the late 40s, in the early 50s. Look at it today. Now, your defense of Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett is an incredibly hard worker. He's got street smarts. He's got a certain kind of gut reaction that he can bring to things, and sometimes it's dead on. And you have to, especially people who are adversaries in politics, have got to be willing to give credit where it's due and to recognize the strength of the other guy. Because if not, you deceive yourself. Mr. Bennett Jr. works hard. He's got that kind of street smarts, and he's got a certain gut reaction to some of the things that the people of BC care about. But what seems to have happened for him in the last 5 years is twofold. First of all, I'm saying it for the umpteenth time, he's finding it's easier to win elections with a coalition than it is to govern with a coalition and keep your house in order once you're in office. And secondly, it turns out that he simply doesn't have the maturity of judgment, the perspective that his father did. And lacking it in this highly politicized province, it turns out now, I think, to be his doom.
I think, too, that because of his cabinet, because of his way he handles it, he is to a large extent isolated from what's going on.
It seems to be Mr. Bennett's preference to work by himself, as literally and directly as he can.
As a loner. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to know, I live in an area where there's no bus service, and it appears to be no light rapid transit either. I talked to Van der Zalm when he's on this program. Now, we're being taxed out here for the gas. We're being taxed by the hydro, and I phoned the hydro and I told them I refused to pay it, and they said they'd cut me off. I wonder what the NDP, what difference they would do for us compared to the Socrates.
Well, all I can do is ask you to look at what we did when we were in office, and we had a chance. We doubled, in the space of 3 years, the total number of hydro buses in service across British Columbia. We extended hydro service to 14 smaller communities in this province, apart from Vancouver and Victoria. We increased hydro's route miles by 30% in 3 years, and we gave you service in Greater Vancouver out to Tawasin and Delta and Richmond, up well beyond New Westminster out to Surrey, service that was never there before. And it was a good start, but it wasn't enough. We did one other thing. We killed a ridiculous scheme to wreck more neighborhoods and to waste more money on a third crossing of Burrard, and we gave you C-Bus instead, which is a tremendous success, which Mr. Van der Zalm now, to his credit, wishes to duplicate and put another third or fourth vehicle on that system.
You're parroting a fair amount of party policy.
I believe in that policy strongly.
There are many people yet who believe that a third crossing, instead of that ludicrously expensive C-Bus, might have been a much better way to go.
At what price? At the price of the ruin of the neighborhoods through which its freeways, its bridge, and its connecting roads would
Charles,
pass.
even the NDP has dropped its no-growth policy because it finally realizes that jobs are more important than no growth.
Jobs are more important than no growth?
Remember you had a no-growth policy?
Oh, I don't think we ever did. We have
you fought the 72 election on mutterings of no growth.
Well, I think our guys, more than any other thing, believe in controlled growth that's sensitive to human and neighborhood values and to environmental values as well.
What? That's it. I am sensitive to
Jack,
human
and I'm not asking what you've done and what they've done in the past. I'm asking what they're going to
What are you going to do in the future?
What are we going to do in the future?
Yeah. Who's going to pay for the LRT?
You're going to pay for it.
You meet the same inflation factor as they meet.
You're going to pay for it. You generally, the taxpayers, of course you're going to pay for it. One difference.
Pay for hospitals if you don't need them. You've got to pay for transit if you don't need it, right?
That's right. It depends on how you pay for it and what's more fair. I personally, speaking for myself, this is not currently party policy, but I wish it were. I personally think you should pay transit entirely out of the gas tax at the pump. Why? Because that would be a further disincentive to the use of the private automobile and thereby a further encouragement to the use of public transit. And it is also a direct means of raising money for public transit in an appropriate way. I'm not sure it should come out of general revenue so much as I think if it came out of the pump, you'd be serving two purposes at one time, two birds with one stone, and it's a better policy.
So you think you should pay for it even if you don't see it?
Look, you realize this, Jack. We don't have service. We're paying it at the pump, when we don't have any bus service whatsoever.
Yeah.
We're paying out the hydro bill. And this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Why the hell should all these people out here in this area be paying twice? You're paying for the insurance because you got to have a vehicle.
Which area are you talking about?
I'm talking about Surrey, east of 176, which I said to Van der Zan. That's south from the Fraser Highway and north to the freeway, past the freeway.
Hold on. When the Valhalla comes, you'll get your transit. But you'll pay for it in the meantime, after the break. Go ahead to Charles Barber, NDP MLA Victoria.
Mr. Barber.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Over the years, politicians, by playing at politics, have ruined this country. Let's face it, the basic tenet of elected government is to supply food, shelter, and jobs. You people have now made government so complex
Yeah.
that you've lost track of what you're really there for. Now, let me give you an example.
Okay.
I cannot, and I'm a better than average paid working man, I cannot buy a house. My children cannot buy a house. We're rapidly becoming a nation of either rich or poor. We're going to be like Europe. And that's the NDP way, I guess, but I don't know why. But, you could do something about this. If you really want to help the people, let me give you an example.
Okay.
You take a house in the Lower Mainland. There are people from Europe and Hong Kong and different places that own 100 houses in this city, and they've never, ever seen them. They just send their money over, and it's all bought up. Mm-hmm. Why can't you pass a law, and you can lobby for it, that says if you own a house, you must live in it? I'll hang up and listen to your
Or be a resident Canadian who rents it out. But I agree with you. This purchase of homes by absentee financiers for large money has added a great measure of the inflation, and I think inflation is largely greed in this country at the moment, and not one of you will tackle that problem.
Well,
Harcourt talks about it.
So does Karen Sanford. Karen Sanford, the MLA for Comox, has been talking on this issue for many years and persuaded our government when we were in to take the first step, which is to have on the registry of land ownership a statement as to nationality. She got that through. The Socreds have dropped it, and that's a shame. It was a start, and a good one, but by no means enough.
No, it's still on. You've now got to declare your nationality when you buy property, don't you?
We asked, or rather Karen asked, I should say, in the legislature, whether or not the Minister of Lands, Mr. Chabot, was in any position now to tell us on the basis of that registry how much foreign ownership of land there was in this province. Mr. Chabot's answer was no. He couldn't do that. The records weren't there. The facts and the figures weren't available.
I thought that legislation was passed.
Well, I believe it was not legislation.
I'll check that with Chabot.
I think it was regulation, Jack.
I want to talk to Chabot too about this business of the farm lots, hobby farms, alienation of vast acreage of what I'm told is lumberland, logging land in British Columbia.
The loggers are quite upset about it.
But this is the man is right. Everybody loses touch with reality. Reality is incredible inflation, incredible house prices, and unless you're the new 20th century family with two incomes, both civil servants, both on indexed pensions, I might say.
Yeah, or both hotliners.
On which you are one of the great advocates of indexed pensions, class discrimination among the workers.
Indexed pensions for everyone.
Can't be done, you know that perfectly well.
If it can be made self-financing, it can be done.
And do you support the teachers? And when they give the line, many of them try to give the line that they've been de-indexed. Do you not think the teachers are well served with 8-point-something indexing? Yes or no?
Yes or no? Do I support the teachers? Yes. Why? Because they've been cheated.
Nonsense.
Yes, they have.
Do you support an indexed pension of 8.6% for teachers?
I don't support a figure. I support a process. I say that
unlimited indexing.
I say indexing has got to reflect the actual cost of being alive.
Do you support the teachers in the present campaign?
In this campaign? Sure, because they want to get back what they won by bargaining.
They signed a contract.
Won by bargaining.
They signed a contract, and then because Fryer outsmarted them a little bit, they're now crying tears, baby tears.
Well, I don't know if they were outsmarted. But I do know.
How can you, when you've got constituencies who have pensions which are not indexed, advocate indexed pensions for the privileged class of civil servant only?
Only I don't.
But that's what's happening.
You didn't understand me. What I said is that pensions should be indexed for every Canadian citizen. Every citizen, that includes teachers, then it certainly includes the seniors in my riding.
If possible.
You bet. And it's got to be self-financing, it's got to be self-perpetuating, it's got to be affordable, and it can be if we manage our affairs correctly.
I was so nice to you all morning, and now I'm going to depart you as a socialist dreamer after the break. We have a social credit fellow on tomorrow morning.
That's right. Alan Williams is going to drop by.
Attorney General.
Attorney General.
Sunday shopping, motoring laws, all kinds of things. Not bad. That'll be good. And Terzian, the brilliant American speaker, 9 a.m. precisely. Investment advice from Nelson Skalbania.